Hello, everybody. Good morning. It's great to be here. I apologize in advance for what is going to be an impromptu presentation. In the last few weeks, I've been working at the archaeological excavation at the Roman Domus, so I worked long hours, didn't have much time to structure the presentation in the way I wanted, and plus the subject is so complex and multifaceted that it's not that easy to pick one angle and then develop it. But I can tell you it's nice to be inside with the AC this morning, instead of being out under the blazing sun. So I'm going to talk about, I'm going to give you a testimony of what was my experience after having operated for the first half of my career in the academic European environment and then moving to the US and learning that on the other side of the ocean they do things in a completely different way. I want to share with you a little bit what is that different way. So obviously, to define and establish best practices that can affect every stage of the life cycle of 3D data, it's critical for all of us, and not just all of us, everybody who's a stakeholder in the process of the digitization of a cultural heritage. And as you may be familiar with, in the past, in the European academic community, many scholars were invested in trying to animate the theoretical debate about the best practices. And it started in 2009 with the first formal release of a shared document, the London Charter, which was created on the margin of a big conference which was organized in London, where scholars from many European universities for the first time sat around a table and started to delineate which were the most important principles driving the process of the digitization of cultural heritage. And in particular, in that very early document, they highlight principles like implementation or documentation, sustainability, and accessibility of 3D data. That experience was so successful that a few years later, in 2011, again at the margin of another big conference in Seville, those scholars, together with other European scholars, got together again, shared the lessons learned, and released another set of principles, the well-known Seville principles, which became, for a long time, the only guidelines that the European scholars had operating in this field. In the Seville principles, there was a major advance with respect to the previous documents, as it was put onward the principle of authenticity, the ability to distinguish immediately, looking at the 3D model, what is reality 3D scan, what has been added reality during post-processing phase, the historical rigor, the importance of sharing the historical and the archaeological sources for any kind of three-dimensional reconstruction, and then, of course, a scientific transparency, which is the first baby step in the direction of sharing paradata with the rest of the community for making your 3D digitization experiment repeatable and therefore scientific. Fast forward to 2016, there was a third major conference in Bordeaux this time, and at this time the group of scholars who sat together to work on best practices was really very large. And though the big meeting did not end up with the presentation of principles as it happened before, but a series of open questions arose, and all those scholars agreed that from that point onward, the next step would have been to address those major open questions for 3D scanning, for digital photogrammetry, for 3D models in general. Reuse of 3D data was identified as one of the key problems at that meeting, and standardization of metadata and paradata, in particular standardization of paradata, was identified as an important area of improvement. While the Europeans were working all together in finding best practices and animating the theoretical debate, the Americans were just having fun. In the American academic environment was having a completely different experience. The field of digital archaeology was dominated by individual scholars who were setting the trajectory for the entire field, like Maurizio Forte at Duke University, Bernard Fischer at the University of Virginia, and then at the University of Indiana, Bloomington. Maurizio Forte was focusing on establishing new theoretical foundations for digital archaeology and digital cultural heritage in the United States through a series of major publications from 1997 to 2020. And Bernard Fischer was the great mind behind some of the most well-known 3D reconstruction projects like Rome Reborn, which recently became a 100% commercial product, and more recently was also the inspirator of the Uffizi project, probably one of the largest project of mass digitization of cultural heritage artifacts at the Uffizi. In 2017, there was the first CAA conference organized in the United States after 2 decades. It's the Computer Applications in Archaeology Conference, which is the main meeting, the main world meeting for all the stakeholders operating in this field. And I was at that conference, and I was very eager to learn, finally, where the digital archaeology in the United States was going. And what I realized is that most of the speeches were about money, were about, I got this new scanner, I got so much money from a university, I'm gonna just try this new drone, and there was a big expo. So I realized that the entire conference was centered on technological fetishism. And this is something which is really relevant in the American academia, because American universities have more money, have more finances. They don't waste time talking about theories and best practices. They just keep buying one scanner after the other and trying to push the technological boundaries to make the process faster and more accurate. And they're really, at that stage, we're not really bothered by standardization of metadata and paradata. Just 3D scan like there's no tomorrow. You will think about the rest in the future. But of course, the more you scan, the more data you generate, the more the problem of handling the data becomes important. And as a response to that emerging problem, commercial companies have emerged in the United States, like TIDAR, a company that offers to manage your 3D data for a cost, kind of very expensive cost. So if you just want to keep scanning like there's no tomorrow, just pay the TIDAR people. They will standardize the data for you. They will store the data for you. They will make them accessible. You can just keep having fun on the field with your drones. And there are other companies doing the same, like SciArc, that are specialized in 3D scanning world cultural heritage site according to their mysterious standards that they don't share with anybody, and they put everything online, waiting for Google to buy their contents. Again, all about money. When I moved, obviously I'm not American, as you can tell from my accent. When I moved from Italy to the United States and I started working at USF, having all the academic experience that I had in Europe, I felt the need to make some changes. So I started working with my colleagues at the University of South Florida to try to make some changes, and in particular working with the 3D digitization unit of the USF, University of South Florida Libraries, and with my own institute, the Institute for Digital Exploration. And we started in the right way. We started with writing papers. We started sharing with the community a photograph of what is the state of digital archaeology in the United States, highlighting the criticalities and pitching possible solutions to those open problems. We published a first paper about the importance of standardization of metadata and paradata, presenting the first on our side of the ocean, the first example of a schema to be used for 3D digitization of cultural heritage. In a second paper of 2021, The Digital Within Archaeology, I focused on delineating guidelines for capturing and processing. And in a more recent paper in 2021, we focused instead on accessibility and web accessibility of our 3D digital content. So you would need that at this point we have done our homework, and you would expect us to get a ton of citations for the work that we have done. And of course, you're wrong, because academics in every part of the world, they have gigantic egos, so they don't cite the work of their colleagues. They think that they are creating the best practices, and they are not really interested in sharing what they're doing with their colleagues. This is a screenshot of the database that we have created at IDEx. IDEx was established in 2017, and since then we have created almost 3,000 3D models in the Mediterranean, in Italy, in Malta, in the United States, and in Greece. About 1,700 of those 3D models are on Sketchfab at the moment. So we created, as I told you, our own schema and our own database, where we have where we use controlled vocabularies. Of course, the key to obtain standardized and shareable data is the use of controlled vocabulary. And in our publications, we have shared all the making of our database. And this is some screenshots of it, where you can see the various sections and where we can continuously update the section about processing and paradata. And the information captured on site and the information captured at the lab, they are all shared through the web repository of the University of South Florida libraries, where all our 3D models hopefully will all be accessible in the short-term future. Currently, the most part of our collection is shared on Sketchfab. About 20% is shared through the USF libraries. This is some screenshots of it, where you can see how the data are presented. The 3D model in OBJ format is accessible through it. In this case, the 3D models still reside on Sketchfab, and they are conjured into the web page. Obviously, the data are not downloadable, and the USF libraries obtains a DOI per every single 3D model that we put in the repository, so they can be cited in publications using the DOI. We have been working recently on another facet of the problem, which is dealing with the legacy data. We have started a project 3 years ago in Sicily, an archaeological site which was excavated almost 120 years ago, and the publications which were produced about that site since then were written in an archaic Italian, where technical terms used to describe archaeological features are very different from those that we are using nowadays, which is an experience not very different from what we are seeing at the excavation at the Roman Domus, where the first exploration was carried out in 1880. So we have developed a workflow to deal with the legacy data, and expanded our controlled vocabularies to incorporate those obsolete terms. And we are integrating this in our usual work. So certainly the American academia is doing baby steps in the right direction, though I can tell you that the availability of a large amount of money does not help. For example, I just learned that the University of South Florida received $150 million for this year only from the state legislature, and 20 millions will be just destined to increasing the digital infrastructure. That means they will just, give us more scanners, whereas we don't need more scanners. We need to learn how to use the scanners that we have, and we need to learn how to manage properly our data and share our data. I don't want more scanners. I want just more time or human help just to put my ducks in a row. There are obviously significant challenges. There's lack of unified standards across both sides of the ocean, although in Europe, as this conference demonstrates, there's more interest in achieving common goals. There are resource constraints, especially for what is related with the long-term storage of the data and curation of the data, updating file formats, and the long-term preservation and accessibility. One problem which is incredibly important for me is reuse of 3D data. As you know, the production, the processing of 3D data is incredibly pricey. Not all the institutions can afford that. And to create a 3D model to address a research question publish the paper, check the box, and then trash and abandon your 3D model is unethical. So it's important to find ways to make our 3D models reusable. And in this specific case, I'm very happy because we have produced almost 250 3D models of Maltese cultural heritage artifacts, and we will simply just pass them all to Tony's unit, and they will perpetuate them and will guarantee the long-term accessibility of them. Thank you.